This is Seaborn from Winning at Home. Welcome to In Progress, a podcast about faith, life, and how we grow. And for this episode, I'm joined again by my wife, Annaliese. Hey, Annaliese.
Hey.
Thanks for being here and hanging out a little bit. And in the previous episode that we recorded, we talked about the fact that we wanted to kind of at least have one episode where you had a chance to get to know us together a little bit, where you got a chance to get to know Annaliese a little bit before we started talking about some stuff that was a little bit heavier. Because it felt like if this is the first time you're ever hearing from Annaliese and it's this like super heavy thing, I don't know, it just felt kind of strange. So we did the not so heavy episode already, and now this one I'm thinking is going to be kind of heavier. Actually, this morning when, I forget if it was right when we woke up or after I took the dog out and came back inside, she had this serious, like, kind of concerned look on her face. And I'm like, what's going on? And she said, well, we haven't really ever, like, sat down and, like, talked about this stuff this way. And I don't know exactly even what you're going to be talking about here. But what I would say is that we've probably had each of these conversations, but maybe 6 months apart or a year apart from each other. Mm-hmm. And I think, based on your reaction and based on just knowing what it was like to live through some of this stuff, that it's probably going to be pretty heavy. And basically that's the intro, background, whatever, just to let you know as you're listening what this is going to feel like, probably, because you've heard my perspective in several of these episodes on what it felt like to be me in my relationship with Annaliese as I've been dealing with this unknown health thing. Mm-hmm. And what you're going to hear today in this episode is from Annaliese's perspective of what it felt like to live with me as I was, in a lot of ways, dealing in unhealthy ways with what I was or am going through. And so because of that, it's going to be pretty heavy, right?
Yeah. I may cry. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, hey, depending on what you say, I may cry. That would be kind of a shock.
That would be a shock.
That would be a shock. But it's, I have a feeling that this is going to be kind of hard for me to listen to some of this stuff.
Yeah.
And the reason we're doing this is because, like I've said before, I know that my health struggle or journey or whatever you want to call it is a unique journey that probably not a lot of other people are going through the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. But I'm guessing that there are some of you listening that the reason you're connecting in with this podcast and with what I do and talk about is because you're dealing with something like that. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important for us who are dealing with this unknown or known thing that just sort of, I don't know, suppresses us and kind of zaps the life out of us, or just limits or lowers our ability or willingness to care or to think about things from other people's point of view in the moment because we're hurting so much. Mm-hmm. I think it's really important for us to hear the perspective from the Annaliese side of things, from the partner's perspective. And so, I'm setting this up so much because I think it's real life stuff, and it's probably going to be some tough stuff. But I think it's important, whether you're the me in this situation or the Annaliese in this situation. I think you'll find whether you're the one in pain or struggling or whether you're that person's spouse or partner, I think that you'll hear some things in here that will be really helpful, really challenging, really, I guess, comforting in some ways of like, oh, okay, I'm not the only one.
Yeah.
And so I say all that to set it up, and I kind of want to hand it off to you, Annaliese, and let you share. You know, I don't know if we haven't really talked about this other than that conversation where she was kind of like, I don't know about this. So just want to hand it off to you, and I don't even know how you're planning on, if you have bullet points or what your thoughts are. So go ahead and share.
I do think it's really important to set the stage for something like this. I think that was really helpful. Thanks for doing that. And I hope, too, that just that, what Alan shared just now, and recognizing that, you know, when you talk about difficult things, especially with your partner, it can look a lot of different ways. And you can sometimes have these conversations sort of scattered. You don't have all of the meaning of it all in one thing, and then you're both good to go sometimes. Especially with stuff like this, you just have to unpack it because there's a lot that has happened. So it was the very beginning of our marriage. We had talked a little bit about this when we were dating, but a very little, because I don't think that I grasped at all how deep it was for you and how much it affected your life.
Yeah, maybe I should jump in for a second and just say, I'm thinking if this is the first episode someone's ever listened to, then they don't have the backstory. But I've been dealing with a, mystery illness, I guess you call it, for 8 years now. Wow. Yeah. That's a long time.
Yeah.
8 years now. I feel lightheaded, brain fog, fatigued, spacey, all day, every day. I feel like I slept 1 hour last night, no matter what, for the last 8 years.
Yeah.
And, so that's what I've been dealing with, that health-wise, and then jumping from doctor to doctor to doctor to doctor and getting no answers.
Yeah.
So that's what, if this is the only episode you're ever listening to, that's the backstory here for what I'm dealing with. And you're going to hear how for a long time into our marriage, I tried to deal with it on my own instead of, sharing life. Sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. That's really important. While we were dating, I knew that generally you had this struggle, but it was really more like, I've been dealing with some health stuff. It's hard, moving on. It was really kind of, I feel like, touched on, at least that was my experience. So while we were dating, I had no idea the depth that it affected you. And also, as we talked about in the previous episode when we were talking about communication and being wired really differently, there were just things about your personality that I was still really trying to get a grasp on and trying to understand you better. And so at that time, right before we got married, I had no idea how little I actually knew was truly you, and how some of that was actually how the health stuff was affecting you. I didn't know any of that. That was like tip of the iceberg. I didn't realize there was an iceberg. So
sure, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I've said to you, and I think I probably said it a few weeks ago, is it seems weird to me because I've been dealing with this health thing longer than we've known each other.
Right.
And I say, I don't feel like you actually have ever met who I think of as me yet.
I know. Yeah.
Because this thing is so big and so life-altering that I just don't have the energy and clarity and,
exactly.
personality that I did before.
Right.
And that's kind of what I still think of as me, even though, it's not anymore, and maybe it never will be again.
Right. Right.
So that's what she's kind of alluding to there with a couple of the comments that she made in that moment.
Yeah, it's like, because when you're just meeting somebody, you're meeting the person who you're getting to know. And so I could grasp what he was explaining when he was talking about it like that, but it didn't really sink in. I don't know. It's just, obviously, right? That's a very meta concept to think about.
It's weird to try to talk about it or explain it or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. So what was really, even as I was trying to write down, I don't know, some kind of a bullet point so that I could talk through what my experience was, I realized too, for me, I see progress as general milestones. And when I'm being asked to explain how I felt along the way, that's a different exercise for my brain. I really had to go back and revisit and really try to think through what was my actual process, because this was the hardest thing I have ever had to do in my life, hands down. Hands down. It was crazy. So let me walk you through a little bit about how that started. So we got married. And then in our experience, when we got married, we started having different kinds of conversations than we ever would have had dating. And then there was weight attached to them, because all of a sudden you're sharing all of your money, all of your assets, all of your future with this person. And so there's some weight attached. So then there are feelings that are a lot more easily triggered, because both partners are typically really aware there's a lot on the line here. And if I don't understand you, I'm in a really scary place. So there was just a different, and it's not terrible. It's just something new to navigate through and to try to figure out your shared language. And like we talked about in the previous episode that we did together, that was a tricky thing, was figuring out our shared language, because we communicate so differently and we process so differently. So there was all of that going on, in addition to the fact that I was starting to realize, wow, whenever we go visit my family, or whenever we go visit your family, or we're talking about having, spending time with friends, you didn't want to do any of those things ever. And it was starting to dawn on me, I'm like, man, Alan is the truest introvert I've ever met. Okay, this is going to be a challenge, but we can figure this out, because I pictured, my union with you. I know you love people. I know you care for them deeply. And I'm like, how do we spend time with people that are important to us? And so, trying to figure through that. Also, just my perspective of who I am is I love to have people in my life. That's really important to me. And so, but I recognized that I was learning this whole new thing. I was learning my new role as a partner. I was learning who you are. And I was trying to piece together all these little fragments of okay, this is really difficult right now. Is this because you're an introvert, or because of this health thing? And so I started trying to talk to you about the health thing, because I was like, I want to know how that's affecting this.
And at this point, would you say you still didn't even really grasp the depth of how much it affected
completely
me?
This was the beginning for me.
That's wild. I'm finding this out in real time as we're talking about this.
We told you this was going to happen.
What do you mean? I've told you exactly.
I know.
But anyway.
Well, and that's part of it, right?
Yeah.
It's part of it thinking, I've communicated that exact thing.
Right.
But for the other person,
I don't want to be complaining about it all the time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I totally validate that. It just.
So what is the lesson for those of us who are dealing with stuff? Just complain more? Just kidding.
That seems simplistic. So that's what it looked like for me in the very beginning. I recognized he had an issue that would affect anybody. And I also recognized that he was just a different personality than me. So I was trying to put together what things are true, innately true about who Alan is, not who Alan is based on what is affecting him, but who Alan truly is from the inside. So I would try to ask him some of these questions, and he got really serious in a different way than when we had any kind of the health talk. And I didn't really talk to him about his health when we were dating because he mentioned it and it seemed like a passing, not like the health thing was passing, but just like, it's not that big of a deal.
That's crazy.
Because that's where you were at and you were trying to accept what your life looked like. And I get that now, but at the time it just... It was a little devious.
I just don't believe that that's how it happened. So
I
that's
know.
Interesting. But that's your experience.
Exactly.
You know?
That's what's so crazy about talking about this. And I knew that this was going to happen.
Yeah.
Because how could it not?
She's
right?
lying to you if you're listening. Just know that.
Wow. So, no, but you got to know that your experience of another person is different than they think your experience of them is. And that's such an important thing to remind yourself of when you come across like disagreements or misunderstandings or even just relaying a shared experience and you guys both recognize, wow, that wasn't really shared
right, like
the way
what's
that I
happening
thought it
right
was.
Now.
Yep,
like
exactly.
I'm like, what? No, what she's describing is not at all what happened, but it was her experience.
That's what made it so isolating for both of us.
And if I were to describe what my experience of those moments was, I'm thinking you probably would be sitting here feeling the same way. Like, what?
Yeah.
No, you didn't. Yeah. You didn't explain
like,
it to
I
that
didn't mean
depth.
that. That's not what I'm sure I didn't say that. Just things like that. Because that's how we feel. We're very subjective to ourselves.
It's crazy.
Yeah, it's crazy. So I'm trying to talk about this and I'm realizing, okay, this is a much different issue, or it's affecting him a lot more than I ever realized. So he's starting to say, I can't talk about this so frequently. I'm sorry. I really can't go there. And I'm sitting here like, I'm trying to learn how to be your partner. And I know that I need input from you. So I don't know where else to go with this. So I actually started, not just for this reason, but partly too because I love psychology and I love knowing that there are resources for when I feel lost in myself. So I was just kind of like, okay, I just need to touch in with a counselor again. So I started seeing a counselor here just to kind of get myself straight and figure out what was going on, because I wasn't getting anywhere trying to get the information that I felt like I really needed. I could tell that this was a huge, massive thing. This is when I began to see the iceberg part.
And I was resisting this conversation because it felt like, why do you need to rehash the stuff that I've already told you once a week? You know, like this is emotionally crippling to me. To have to be like, hey, let's talk about the worst part of my life for a while.
And that was what was so devastating to me, being wired the way that I am. So just bringing in the Enneagram again super quick, but I'm a type 2 on the Enneagram, which is a helper. So literally my core motivation and my core need is to help fill a need. Help fill anybody's need. I consider it my purpose on this earth to be there for people who are in need. And so especially when it's my partner and they're telling me, hey, not only can I not provide you with this information, but you're hurting me by asking. That was like double whammy. Like that was brutal. And I knew that you couldn't help me with that. So like, here I am, I'm really trying to be emotionally healthy here, like for myself, and not feel super beat down and then take it out on you and then like blame you for reacting this way? Because I could see, like, empathetically, I could reach to see your perspective on that and recognize you're coming from your own spot, and that's valid, and that's where you were at. And yes, it was unhealthy, but you were in your own process too. And I'm sitting here on my side like, what am I going to do with that then? So he's valid. So what I feel like is valid, I don't know what's going to happen. Am I always going to be, in some of my notes that came up for me when I was thinking through this, like, am I always going to be disconnected from my partner? Did I just get married to somebody that I can't fully know? And it was freaky.
Yeah.
It was so frightening. So it was really important for me to see a counselor at that time.
Yeah.
And I couldn't tell you how quickly that all started to dawn on me, but it was within the first 6 to 8 months, I'd say, for me. So as I was working through this with my counselor, she was really encouraging me, you need to figure out how to keep showing up. Whatever that looks like for you, maybe you don't talk about this exact thing with him, or maybe you bring it up as infrequently as you can, but it's so important that you don't repress and cut off. Because obviously, right, like everybody who's listening, I'm sure you can think through the damage that would cause if I just withheld because Alan was withholding. And that's not the solution, but it was brutal. It felt really unfair in some ways that I would have to do all of this extra work without Alan being involved, because I felt like what I needed was what he could give me, like his insight in himself. But then God came in and really challenged me, hey, look at your self-perception. Yes, I've made you with these strengths and, of communicating and really desiring to be connected to people and really desiring to pour in and invest and know them fully. But what if I was challenging you to do this with me first? And I realized that I was trying to act like God in a way. I was trying to say to Alan, no, I'm your person. I'm your first and foremost. And I was literally, like I was saying before, like I feel like I've been put on this earth to be your person and to help fix this need for you. You can trust me. You got to open up to me. Like, I don't know if you guys can you see how that could deeply affect and actually push Alan away if I'm trying to step into the God arena? And God was really challenging me, like, yes, I put all these things in you, but what if I'm asking you to use them in an entirely different way than you've ever used them before?
Yeah.
And so he was challenging me, hey, anything you feel like you want to say to Alan or you want to get from Alan, I want you to come to me first. So that in itself was just a twist. It was a twist of what order I was doing things in. So God wasn't telling me, hey, you really need to hold off. You need to just leave him alone. And that wasn't what he was asking me to do. He was asking me to talk to him before I talked to you. And ultimately that started changing me.
Yeah.
It was crazy. But what I didn't realize in the beginning, and what I probably didn't realize until recently thinking about it, is how much God wanted to show me that valuing his journey with somebody I care about and valuing that that's his space, and how do I support a person who's doing their journey with God in their space and give them time to process, how do I support that best? Always before I would have stepped in and said, how can I help? How can I tell me how I be
involved in doing this instead of how can I support this happening?
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Always it would have been like that before. And this was a total shift for me. And again, pretty meta, because I'm being asked to step outside of what I think I'm here for, and to literally to step outside of it and to allow God to turn me in a different direction. And God's showing me, this is how you can still fulfill this. You're still showing up, like my counselor asked me to be open to doing. You're still showing up as you, but it just needs to look a different way to be the healthiest and be the most transformative. So I started going to God.
That's cool. As you're describing that, I'm actually reminded of thinking through how throughout our relationship, I've seen you get a lot better at that with other people.
Yep.
I don't know that I really noticed that that's what it was, that was kind of the category between you and I.
Mm-hmm.
But I watched, early on, we've been married 5 years, so it's not like this huge length of time, but you can grow and change a lot in the length of 5 years.
Definitely.
And I watched early on in our marriage that your response to, family, close friends going through stuff was you wanted to take a really active role in fixing things, whether that fixing meant, okay, here's what you need to do, and I'll lay out step 1, 2, 3, 4. You just do this, and everything's going to work out fine for you. And I've watched as you've been able to, now I have the language for it, to move that role from helping and fixing to supporting and being there for people.
Yes.
And that's cool. I honestly had no idea that that this was the genesis of that.
Yes, it absolutely was.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's cool to see how both of us, as you're describing what it felt like for you, to see, as you would say, the tip of the iceberg and then find out there was a bunch more there.
Yeah.
It's really crazy. I was struck by how it sounds like both of us felt bait and switched a little bit,
We totally did.
Because you're like, okay, you didn't tell me the scope and scale of what you're dealing with. I thought it was who knows? I thought it was this is going to affect 10% of your life kind of a deal.
Yeah.
And exactly. It turns out it affects 90% of your life.
Yes.
And so you're going, holy cow, I had no idea.
Yep.
And the interesting thing is, while that was dawning on you, you're going, okay, if it's that big of a deal, I need a bunch more information.
Yeah.
So what that did was make me feel bait and switched. Like, hey, this was something we could talk about, as we were dating and engaged, and we kind of brainstormed a couple different doctors and specialists I could go see. But it wasn't something that was like talked about all the time. It was sort of a peripheral kind of a thing.
This is dawning on me too.
Yeah.
I did with this what I do have a tendency to do, which is I think something that seems like it's happening a certain way right now, well, that probably means it's going to affect the whole rest of the thing. So when we were dating and stuff and engaged, I felt like I was walking with you, and you were like, I felt like I'm almost more in real time. And then when we're married, all of a sudden I realize like there's more of an iceberg to the health thing.
Yeah.
And I'm picturing, I just said, did I just get married to somebody I'm literally never going to connect with again?
Right.
I applied the difficulty to our whole life. And I'm like, hey, we need to fix this right now.
Yeah.
Or it's just going to be true forever.
Yeah.
Which is hard for me. And
your fix was what made me feel bait and switch.
Of course.
Because it was like, okay, before, we talked about this stuff and we brainstormed some ideas and we,
right, because it was real time. It could be nice and like, hey, if you do this, great. If not, we're just brainstorming. Like,
well, and I did do those things.
Exactly. Yeah.
But the frequency of those conversations and I don't even know the word to use, because it's not like, I guess almost like the level of interest that you took in it, you know?
Yeah.
Which makes sense if you're thinking this is affecting 10% of his life. Like, this is kind of a little peripheral thing, and okay, yeah, we'll talk about it and then move on.
Yes, right.
And once you realize, no, this is a 90% thing, then you're like, okay, now I need some answers. I need to talk about this. I need to come up with some things.
Yep.
And I'm going, whoa. Like, if you were feeling, did I just get married to someone that I'm never going to be able to know?
Yeah.
I was thinking, did I just get married to someone that's going to be picking at this
never going to
scab
let me rest
for my whole life, like all the time?
Right.
You know?
Right.
And it's really interesting to just hear how that felt from both perspectives, you know?
Yeah, it is. It's like, okay, so I thought of it like on a scale. So you were saying, so I'd ask you about the health thing, and then you were saying, actually, I'm the one who's going through it, so my feelings are always going to outweigh yours on this scale.
Sure.
And so that's true. I mean, that's so true. Like in a lot of ways, it's like, well, I'm the one who's dealing with this. That's true. But I was left feeling like, well, then my feelings are never, ever gonna come close to being equal with yours on this subject, so the whole subject's out. So then my feelings have to be out. But what I cared about underneath my feelings was still happening.
Yeah.
And it was still stuff I really wanted. And so that was the journey, was like, how do I, like I've said before a few times, how do I show up and not cut off, but still respect you and value you and give you space, but still let you know that, like, that what I'm feeling and what I'm going through is also its own thing, and it's also a part of our journey. And like, how frequently do I do that? And obviously it can't be frequently, but it has to be sometimes, because otherwise I'm cutting off. It just was this whole weird, super complicated thing.
Yeah.
It's like,
go ahead.
It was crazy.
Sorry. Well,
no, that's fine.
I was going to say that I've talked about this previously, you know, of what it looked like to start letting you in on this, because what I realized, I don't know, probably a few years into marriage was, you know, I felt like this is the thing that's affecting me and my life, and you rightly felt like this is a thing that's affecting us and our life, even if it's disproportionately affecting Alan as an individual.
Yes.
It's affecting us together.
It's like both and.
Yeah. And I would feel, you know, you would say like, oh man, it's just so hard that we're dealing with this, you know, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I'm dealing with this.
Yeah.
And it took years.
It did take years
for me to figure out this is somebody that I've chosen to share my life with, and that means I have to figure out a way to let her in on this. And you know, I when I had that realization, I talked to you and said, hey, here's what I can do. You know, I've been realizing I've been trying to hold you at arm's length and kind of do this part of our lives as my life.
Yep.
And I need to fix that, but I can't just open it up and say, okay, whatever questions you have, whenever they pop in your head, I'm an open book, you know? So I started this off by saying, all right, we can have one day a week for 10 minutes. I'll be able to have conversations about this stuff. And if you want to talk about some ideas that you have for me to go see somebody different, you have some questions about how this is affecting whatever, 10 minutes once a week, I can handle that. Because otherwise I felt like if these conversations start, then I'm going to be trapped.
Yep.
And it's just going to have to be until the conversation is resolved or until the thing is resolved.
Right.
And I'm living in the middle of a health thing that isn't resolved. So how could there be a resolution to the conversation if there's no resolution to the thing we're having the conversation about?
Yes.
So I'm like,
a good point.
I can do 10 minutes once a week, and then we got to be done.
So this is
and you came to life.
I did come to life.
That was really shocking to me.
Because you felt like I'm not giving her nearly, I know that I'm not, what I can agree to is not nearly what she's asking for.
Yeah.
But what's interesting is, so the behind the scenes of where I was at and where I had grown to be by the time you offered that.
Graciously offered that.
You graciously offered that. You deigned to offer that.
Right.
Is that, so God had been doing this challenge with me, and as I'd been practicing going to him first and practicing how that looked like in real time, it was painful, definitely at first, because it still felt unfair in the beginning. Like, no, I should be allowed, right, to approach this.
Okay. I was going to ask what felt unfair, but it was, you're
I
talking
should be
about
allowed to say how I feel. Yes, this is still in the beginning.
No, but I'm asking, you said it felt unfair.
Yes.
And I'm just trying to get the context. Are you saying, you're saying this to God? This feels unfair that you're asking me to do the support instead of to do the fix? Is that what you mean?
No, not the support and the fix. It actually felt unfair that he was asking me to not go to you first. So even at first, the shift in communication
That's how I would
process,
describe the difference between support
and fix.
And
oh,
fix.
okay, then absolutely.
You're here in real time. This is what it looks like.
You will define things differently, and you will need to ask for clarification. Is that what you meant? Yes, it is. So, So I had already been practicing just pushing through, because in my heart, I knew God's Spirit was behind that energy, and that was what he was blessing my energy. And whenever you're asked to do something hard like that, you're literally you're not pushing your feelings away, but he's asking you to just try something different. So he's valuing that you feel these things too, God is. And he's with you as you step into the discomfort of trying something that's outside of your comfort zone. So I had been practicing this and practicing letting go of my expectations, like I was saying, of myself and my role as his partner, in my expectations of what my marriage was going to look like. I mean, this is usually years, right, before you get married that you picture something. I mean, you don't have to be like romanticizing it all the time, but we all picture something probably if we were sharing a life with somebody. So I had to be letting go of exactly what that looked like.
Me holding you at arm's length about something that affected 90% of my
I know
life.
That's most people's dream,
but
that wasn't mine, no.
Okay. Dang.
So, and it was even just about me, even my expectations of God and what I thought who I thought he was to me, right? So this ended up being, coming away from it ended up being a total transformation of my own relationship with God too, because he's asking me to see him as God and see him as my God and see him as your God, and that can mean something totally different because you're a different person than me. You're a different person than me. And I know that sounds like that's pretty simplistic, but that's a huge mind shift when you consider what does it look like to really love, God's definition of love. It's like, I want you to receive healing however he wants to give it to you. If I'm not even immediately involved on any level, that should still be as meaningful to me that you receive that as if I were the one giving it to you.
Yeah,
that's real love.
That's cool. As you're saying that, I'm thinking of Jesus saying, love your neighbor as yourself. And I think how a lot of us interpret that, and just kind of the natural way that that's going to happen, is, okay, I want to treat other people the way I want to be treated, right?
Right.
But if you hear, even as Annaliese and I are talking, how I want to be treated is different than how she wants to be treated.
Exactly.
And so if I treat her the way I want to be treated, then she's going to be like, why is he being such a jerk? Or why is he not meeting my needs?
Yep.
And to make this jump, and it was cool that you talked about this, of loving by God's definition of love.
Yeah.
It goes to this next thing, Jesus saying, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, how do you love yourself? You love yourself in the way that you communicate as love,
Wow.
And so to make this transition or this jump or this switch from treat other people the way I want to be treated, which by that I mean treat other people the way I wish they would treat me, say the things I wish they would say, do the things I wish they would do. Actually, what it means is I wish when people talk to me, they would think about how to talk to me.
Yes.
Instead of how to talk to blank cardboard cutout of a person.
Right.
I'm not that.
Right.
And I think when we talk about, the Enneagram and that kind of stuff, that's why I'm like, no, I'm not, don't think of me as a 5.
Right.
I'm Alan.
Yes.
And yeah, some of those traits line up with who I am, but that's not me.
Right.
I'm Alan.
Right.
Treat me like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a key thing and such a powerful thing to understand, because I went through a lot of life going, thanks for the bad advice, Jesus. I'm treating other people the way I want to be treated, and they hate it.
Everyone hates it.
It's going really bad. Like, what the heck,
Yeah.
And to understand that I want to be treated different than you want to be treated.
Yep.
And to think about things from the other person's perspective
Yes.
is just so key in understanding, my relationship with Annaliese is not just different than my relationship with anybody else because we're married or because, whatever. It's because Annaliese is unlike anyone else. And so the way that I care for her should, not only because she's my wife, obviously there should be a whole next level of care because of that, but the way I care for you is different because you're you.
Yeah.
And you're different than anybody else,
Yeah. Yeah.
So I was just struck by that in the moment. And I think we're kind of in the middle of a work day here, so Annaliese has about 10 more minutes before we jump back, and
That's okay.
she needs to get back to work.
Yeah, but that was a really good point. I just want to say that kind of brought up the love languages. I don't know if any of you listening have done that or are familiar with that, but what's interesting about that is that you recognize you don't just have a primary love language. There are also love languages you have a total blind spot to. You would never consider showing love in acts of service or in quality time if yours is primarily one of the other ones, like words of affirmation or something like that. But that's just kind of what that made me think. And it's just so important. I can't stress enough that I did not choose this transformation in a way that made sense to me. And if any of you listening desire for that kind of transformation and for that kind of next level capability for yourself to have that kind of empathy and to be able to show that kind of love to your spouse, I would really, really encourage you to get into specific prayer with God and just make that a specific prayer, and he'll show you ways to do that. And I know we've been talking all about how so difficult this was, and it really was. But like Alan said, he didn't even see that it started with he and I. He saw the change in me for other people. And that is that's huge for me, because it's often the hardest for us to see the effects of the work we've done and the progress we've made.
Yeah,
and
true.
we need to listen to people who are giving us that feedback of hey, I see this in you. We need to listen to that, because that's what's showing up from me. And I genuinely give all the credit to God giving me the opportunity to change my mindset, but he gave me a place to go. I want you guys to hear that too. I felt like I couldn't go to my spouse in the ways that made sense for me to go to him. But God gave me a place to go, and he gave it to me on purpose, and he gave it to me for my sake, and he gave it to Alan for Alan's sake. He gave Alan that space too of meeting me where I'm at, so that Alan didn't come and have to meet a need that he couldn't have met anyway in me. And just the growth that took, it took you guys probably about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
It took at least 2 years. And that's insane. If somebody had told me at the beginning of my marriage, hey, just so you know, for a real connection and really getting to know your spouse, it's going to be about 2 years. I just don't know what I would have done. I probably would have imploded. I can't handle that.
That would have been,
can't conceive of that.
Out.
I would have definitely freaked out.
Yeah.
But I just want you guys to hear, God is so good. And he's so gracious, and this is really, it's difficult work, but when you come through it, you're like, holy freaking cow. I never, ever could have created this in myself, but it's the exact me that I want to be right now. I'm that much closer to the me I want to be and the me I want to be for you, and it helped me in so many other ways too, right? I'm walking around just aware of people in a different way. I'm everybody is genuinely going through their own thing.
Yeah.
What does that look like? How can I be curious without being demanding? I'm allowed to be curious.
I actually think right there, that line is probably the biggest gift that you can give to someone. If you're the spouse or the parent or the close friend or whatever situation you find yourself in with someone who's dealing with some tough stuff, how can I be curious without being demanding? And so, I think for me, the lesson for the people that are going through the pain, the individual who's suffering, or however you want to define it, I think the takeaway and what really breaks down that dividing barrier between two people is stop holding them at arm's length. Especially if it's your spouse.
Right.
Because you're just doing damage. And you might not see it in the moment, or you might be so hey, I'm doing everything I can to keep my head above water.
Right.
If I'm honest, I don't really care. I'm just doing what I have to do to make it through today.
Right.
But if you're there and you're holding, especially, like I say, your spouse at arm's length, you're doing some serious damage. And, like you just said, I love that. If you're the one who's journeying along with somebody who's in the middle of something. Whether it's like me, not having a diagnosis, not being able to figure out what it is.
Right.
Or if it's after the fact, there has been a diagnosis and now we're trying to figure out the best way to move forward. Or if there's been a traumatic or tragic event that happened and now I'm figuring out how can I be there for somebody to find a way to be curious without being demanding.
Right. And part of how
I love that. That's
awesome.
Cool. That's huge.
I mean, I think as I talk, so if I don't write it down, I probably won't remember that I said that. But just really quick too, on when you talked about giving me 10 minutes.
Yeah.
The reason that I was so happy about that is because God had worked with me to that point to be receptive that anything Alan was willing to give me was exactly right, that was right, and that was part of Alan's journey, and that's part of his gift to me. Yeah, we can go back if you... But it was really important for me to be accepting of that, and that was one of the ways I practiced being curious without being demanding, was that I took what you were able to give me, and I realized in that moment, in a way I couldn't have in the beginning, that you needed to protect what you valued as well.
Yeah.
And that you recognized you needed to take a step, but you needed me to be okay.
Yeah.
That was what the step looked like. And so that's what I needed to give you for the true love part. So anyways,
That's cool.
That was neat.
Yeah. Why? We're kind of wrapping up, getting to the end of our time here, but I'm wondering if, this might be an ongoing conversation, because I'm guessing that you've got some more stuff that you could talk about with this journey and what it looked like.
Yeah.
And I really think, just like I had a hard time finding a resource that could help me and come alongside me as I was in the middle of, kind of where I still am right now, like no answers.
Yeah.
There's really, at least to my knowledge, we haven't really come across something of how to cope with a loved one suffering or struggling or whatever it is, And so I think that if this could be the beginning of an ongoing conversation, I'd love to keep doing it and have you back again to share.
So that feels really right.
Yeah, cool.
That's true.
Well, thanks for sharing, and, thanks for listening to as you hear us talk about some heavier stuff. But I'm really grateful, Annaliese, for you being in and sharing that stuff. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for welcoming this.